On this special episode of Hope Springs Eternal, we have had an opportunity to have a conversation with Chaplain Margaret Kibben. Chaplain Kibben, in her final active duty assignment in the Navy, was the U.S. Navy's 26th Chief Chaplain, serving as the Director of Religious Ministry for the Department of Navy, advising the Secretary of the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and the Commandant of the Coast Guard on all matters pertaining to religion and the respective services. She led a community of 2,500 active and reserve officers and enlisted religious ministry professionals. Prior to this assignment, Chaplain Kibben served as the 18th chaplain of the Marine Corps and Deputy Chief of Chaplains. She earned a bachelor's degree from Goucher College in Maryland and a master's of divinity and doctorate of ministry degrees from Princeton Theological Seminary in New Jersey. She also has a master's degree in national security and strategic studies from the Naval War College in Rhode Island. Kibben served as a senior fellow, United States Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. On January 3rd, 2021, Chaplain Kibben was elected by the House and sworn in by Speaker Nancy Pelosi as the 61st chaplain of the United States House of Representatives. I invite you to listen now as we have a conversation with Chaplain Kibben. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have Chaplain Margaret Kibben here with us. She's the U.S. House of Representatives chaplain, and thank you so much, Chaplain Kibben, for being here with us.
My pleasure, Natalie. Thank you so very much for the opportunity.
So my first question for you is, could you tell us a little bit about your call to ministry?
Sure. I was a young lady. I was a young girl in church at home. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I was in a Presbyterian church just outside Philadelphia. I had a wonderful youth pastor. I was about 14, and I had a sense that as I watched my youth pastor work, that I'd really like to do what he was doing. And honestly, it had kind of a combination of things happened. I was one of those kids that people told me their stories, what was going on in their lives, and whether it's a problem solver or just somebody who had a good ear, I'm not sure which, but I put that together with this sense of connection with my youth pastor and said, I think that's what I want to do. I was about 14.
Wow. So, what led you to serve as U.S. House of Representatives chaplain?
Oh my gosh, that's a long story, but so I served in the military for 35 years. I was a Navy chaplain. I served both the Navy and the Marine Corps and retired from that in 2018. And I knew that God wasn't quite finished with me yet, but God wasn't really making very clear what the next step would be. And so over a bit of time, maybe about a year and a half or so, it took a while for God to speak. And I happened to get an email, and somebody said, your name has been brought forward as being considered for the role of chaplain as the House of Representatives. I was one of 5 people being interviewed, and the interview took quite a long process. And finally, when the interview was all said and done, that it was by a bipartisan task force, by the way. It was about 6 people, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. And they interviewed these 5 candidates, and it was my name that was brought forward and to the speaker. And then the speaker ensured that I then met with the minority leader and the majority leader. And so among the 3 of them, they determined that I was to be the next chaplain of the House. And that's how it happened.
Wow, what a journey. What have been some of the challenges of being the first woman to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives chaplain, as well as you kind of been the first in several different roles that you served in your life as the 26th Chief of Chaplains of the United States Navy, as well as the 18th Chaplain of the United States Marine Corps, and I could go on and on. What have been some of the challenges being just the first woman to serve in those roles?
I have to be perfectly honest. I really don't like that question. And the reason I don't like it is because I don't know how to be anything else but a woman. And so I don't know what the challenges would be if I weren't a woman. So are the challenges because I'm female, or the challenges because the way the timing works? But I will tell you, as I grew up, as I had, I asked about my call to ministry, from the time I announced my decision to become a minister, nobody ever told me I couldn't. So I never had anybody saying, "Oh my gosh, you're a woman, that's impossible," or "Women don't do that." And of course, I heard some murmuring of that in the background, but it really was not a very loud uh, narrative in my life. So it never really occurred to me that I couldn't do it. And so therefore, then falling into some of these positions that I've had, it just so happened I felt I was the most qualified for the job, or at least I hope that was the case. And I took it that way. It was not a matter of saying, "Oh, great, I'm the first woman, and therefore aren't I wonderful?" It wasn't like that at all. It was more like, I'm very grateful to have this opportunity. I realize that this opportunity may or may not have been afforded to women before me, but I appreciate the fact that it has been given to me, and I also have come to appreciate the fact that it enables other people, men and women, to realize that sometimes the obstacles we think that are there aren't really there, or they are, but they're surmountable. And if you're the right person for the job and God has ordained you for that position, and I may sound a little predestinarian there, but if you are the one that God intended for you to be there, it'll happen. It may not happen in your timing. It may not happen in the capacity that you think it should happen. But with your gifts and graces, if that's where God wants you, that's where you'll be.
Thank you so much. As U.S. House Representatives Chaplain, you minister to several individuals with varied religious backgrounds. What are some of the blessings you've experienced through serving this very diverse group of people?
Well, and you have to remember that the demographic of the House of Representatives is the same demographic for service in military service. So you talk about different faith traditions. Just in the chaplain corps alone, there were 200 faith traditions represented just by chaplains. Now, granted, that may mean 10 different kinds of Baptists and 5 different kinds of Presbyterians and so forth. So it kind of grows exponentially like that. But the idea of working in a pluralistic environment has really been part and parcel of my ministry since I started almost 40 years ago. And the idea of working with people of different faith traditions is very comfortable to me. And in fact, it's very rewarding in many cases, because you do have a chance to see how people are journeying in faith and how God speaks to people in different ways. The challenge, of course, comes is that I am a Christian, and I have certain principles that I abide by. I have certain understandings, theological understandings, and they may be at odds with someone else's theological understanding. But I also know that every person is part of God's creation, and that God has allowed us to see in each other Himself, God's self, and so that has been the most exciting part about serving in a pluralistic environment, is looking to see how God is working in other people's lives.
Thank you so much. My next question is, our country has gone through a lot of turmoil over the last several years, and it's understandable that the turmoil would be reflected in the congressional chambers of the Capitol. In your position as chaplain, what are some ways you've seen God's intervention during this time? What have been some blessings and what have been some challenges?
Well, that's a great observation. I often say they don't call them representatives for nothing. So they do represent not only faith traditions, but they represent socioeconomic backgrounds. They represent the full spectrum of wealth or intelligence. And so when they come here, you can't expect 435 people to be exactly the same. And so when there aren't similarities, there's often some challenges, some dissent, some aggravation between each other. And oh, by the way, they represent what is happening in our country today. And so, to your point, and a keen observation, what you see in the House is really what is happening across the nation. I would, however, highlight the fact that our nation started with acrimony, that we were not, though we call ourselves the United States, we have rarely been unified in our understanding of how government should be put together, how we should do our banking, how we should govern ourselves as a nation or as states, what opinion is more important. I mean, this is how our country started, and is actually what makes democracy so remarkable. And the country as an experiment, if we can keep it, as has been said, is so it's both precarious, but it's also full of promise. And to answer your question in terms of what do I see here that is in fact promising, it is those moments where you don't often see them on screen because that doesn't sell social media or papers or airtime. But I often call it the 10, 10, and 80 rule. What you see on social media and what you see broadcast throughout the country, there's 10% of the crazies on one side and 10% of the crazies on the other side, and then there's 80% in the middle. And it's that 80% for the most part where you see a lot of really intentional connection making, intentional conversations, opportunities to work with each other and look to see how they can create a bipartisan bill or a bipartisan approach to a certain subject. That is definitely promising. But the other thing that is not well known to the country is that every week that they are here in town, every Thursday morning in the House, there is a bipartisan prayer breakfast that takes place at 8 o'clock in the morning. And it's bipartisan and it's well represented by both sides. And it's there at this prayer breakfast where they pray for each other, regardless of how they will then go out and vote. And there's some tension to that too, of course, but to hear each other's stories, to understand how people are journeying through life and some of the challenges that are being laid before them and some of the real human concerns that they share, that takes place in a small room. And it's a wonderful, it's probably the most peaceful hour on the Hill that week, but it's a wonderful, promising experience that demonstrates that faith matters and that our humanity, we are connected in our humanity and we haven't lost that awareness.
Thank you so much. My last question for you is for the clergy who are watching this conversation and who are ministering in congregations who are discouraged, what would be one piece of advice you would give them as they serve in maybe difficult times?
The one thing that we have as people of faith, and particularly as Christians, the one thing that we have that the world does not offer is hope. And if we start buying into the hopeless narrative, we will be put out. We will be discouraged, and it will not be available to us. But if you look at our faith is built on hope. And from the very start of you can go back to Adam and Eve, but let's go a little bit further. I mean, let's go a little bit closer to time, and let's talk about Moses and the Israelites being brought out of Egypt. Why? Because God had established a covenant with them, and that covenant was based on a hope, a promise that he was giving them at the promised land. And that promise is ours always. And it is the one timeless thing that is available to us. As you stop and think about what it is that we as people of faith are trying to encourage people is that we are not of this world, and that the world does not have the power over us that we think it does. It is in fact very discouraging. It creates sort of an underlying anxiety, but that's not ours that we need to hold on to. We have something that is so much more important, and that is the hope that we've been given. I'm looking for a quote that I'm working on another thing right now. I'm looking on a quote that has a wonderful that captures that pretty well. Give me just a second to see if I can track this down. Well, it's not coming to me fast enough. But anyway, hope is our strength.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this little conversation. It was an honor, Chaplain Kibben. And for those of you who watched, I hope this was a blessing, encouraging, and informative time. Thank you again, Chaplain.
You are quite welcome. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.